Welcome first-time listeners and returners to the Sports Deli. The Sports Deli is sponsored by SportRx. You can go to sportrx.com. Dr. J hails to us from Maryland. He's a sports junkie and he loves politics, and he won third place in a Rick Pitino lookalike contest. He loves golf, and as for Hootie Hoot, I hail to you from Detroit, Michigan. I played 5 sports in high school. My dad committed suicide when I was 9 years old, where I played college basketball for Goucher College, and I also played intercollegiate tennis. I got my master's degree. I have a beautiful daughter. I do a lot of skills training in the sport of basketball. I coach men and women at the collegiate level, and I currently coach at a low-income, first-generation high school. On this Inauguration Day 2020, in honor of America, Lady Gaga singing this beautiful rendition of the national anthem. So today we're going to talk about the impact of the WNBA on the state of Georgia, not only in terms of the 2 Senate runoff votes that occurred recently, but we'll also talk about the insurrection and the reaction of some of the professional athletes when it comes to that, but as well as the impact that the WNBA players had on the Atlanta Dream and its minority owner, Kelly Loeffler, who seems to be going downhill very fast, which I couldn't be more excited about in terms of losing her Senate seat and losing her minority ownership with the Atlanta Dream. We'll also talk about the ridiculous situation about the flawed Rooney Rule in the NFL and how after another round of NFL head coaching vacancies, they again have been filled by white men, and as of today's broadcast, with only one opening remaining with the Houston Texans, there have been no African Americans hired. I'll also talk about my criticism for Tom Brady and his missed opportunity to speak up against the Black Lives Matter movement and systemic and institutional racism, and more specifically, white privilege. We will also talk about Kyrie Irving and how I think Stephen A. Smith overstepped his bounds when it came to his opinions until he knew all the facts, and what an amazing job Kyrie has done in so many other ways, and how I think he's going to be fine. And also mad props to Maya Moore for what she's been doing over the past couple of years. So buckle your seatbelts, and let's get ready to do this together right here in the Sports Deli. Jimmy Butler of the Miami Heat.
We see the 2 different USAs that we live in. It's sad. It truly is. It's sad.
Draymond Green from the world champion Golden State Warriors.
It's baffling to see the reaction that the law enforcement had, and whoever else was involved from a authoritarian standpoint, to see the National Guard standing on those same steps when there was a peaceful protest, and now to see a terrorist attack and no National Guard. It just goes to show you where this country is, where this country has been, and probably where it's going to stay.
Kawhi Leonard from the Los Angeles Clippers.
You see the privilege. You see the privilege in America. And it's sad to see. Because if any of us were out there, I think it would have been tear gas, mace, probably gunshots,
And LeBron James.
The events that took place yesterday was a direct correlation of the president that's in the seat right now, of his actions and his beliefs and his wishes. He cares about nobody besides himself. Nobody. Absolutely nobody. He doesn't care about this country. He doesn't care about his family. He doesn't care about anybody besides himself. And we've seen the tweets that happened along this whole path to the destruction of what happened yesterday. Those events was because of him.
Angela Rye.
So watching this, knowing that from every single side of the Capitol, these domestic terrorists were allowed in that building because they believed it was theirs without regard for human life. The staff, who are like my brothers and sisters, that was horrible to watch. And you see the difference between when someone believes the police works for you and when someone else believes from all of their past experience that the police work against them, perhaps even shooting to kill them when they protect and serve everyone else. And so to that end, you know, you have a quote from James Baldwin where he says, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. And we've been in that rage, not just for 4 years, but for 402 years. We all need to be saying the same thing from every perch. And it doesn't just need to be Black athletes. There need to be allies who are in this. Max, to your point, knowing, if you know full well that the outcome would have been different had the protesters looked different, that signifies to you that it's time to make a different type of change. You can't just look at this anymore and say, that's a shame. You have to say, I've got something I got to do on this. And here's how I'm going to respond. I'm not just going to speak or tweet or post a picture or hold my fist up or wear this particular shirt. I'm going to go out and figure out what I can do to actually solve this from my perch.
So one of the things that we've discussed here in the Sports Deli was about, as I mentioned before, sometimes African Americans are only going to listen to African Americans, even if it's the same message, and whites will listen to whites. And I've been extremely critical of Tom Brady, and I'm going to be extremely critical of him again, and the media, and the lack of efforts on the part of the NFL to do more when it comes to educating people. They have these public service announcements that they talk about, you know, systemic racism and social injustice. But look, the owners haven't done a damn thing. But just as was the case with the WNBA players being so instrumental in an election, along with Stacey Abrams, along with Latasha Brown, along with Cliff Albright, along with thousands of others who went and knocked door to door. The NFL, and the face of the NFL still, Tom Brady, has missed out on such an amazing opportunity to not only be deemed the GOAT, the greatest of all time when it comes to quarterbacks, but what he's missed out on, and I'm sure people down the road will probably criticize him for in the locker room, is that he has not been more outspoken with regards to Black Lives Matter. It's been so sad to me because it's so simple. It's such an easy thing from my perspective to stand up and fight for social injustice and say it. Say those words, Black Lives Matter. And why Tom has refused to do it and why the media has given him a pass. Like, the media will rip African Americans left and right for any mistakes that they've made. Kyrie Irving, Antonio Brown, and maybe they should. But where is mainstream media when it comes to ripping Tom Brady in the same manner that African Americans are often not given a pass for regarding this issue? And do you know how far that will go in a locker room? Doug Williams said it best on this podcast. African Americans, no matter what, will remember you forever in such a different light if you stand up and speak upon an African American cause, especially arguably one of the most important causes in the history of our country, institutional racism and white privilege. And I hope that somebody who's listening to this podcast, whether it's a Jamel Hill, whether it's Doug Williams, whether it's Hugh Jackson, you know, Mark Cuban was on Clubhouse and said that as much pull as he has in the world and in sports, he doesn't think that he could have much influence on NFL owners. And I don't know what it would take to get Tom Brady before the NFC Championship game to lock arms. Can you imagine if Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady locked arms? 3 white privileged quarterbacks in the NFL. 3 white guys. And Aaron Rodgers has been outspoken. And Drew Brees has apologized for some of his comments that he made during the summer months of 2020 about the flag and patriotism and Black Lives Matter. Can you imagine if the 3 of them locked arms and did anything, something that spoke on Black Lives Matter and educated white America? Because white people listen to Trump. White people listen to white pro athletes. And what a powerful thing that would be. And what a missed opportunity. Just what a missed opportunity. Such a freaking bummer. And I will challenge all of you white listeners out there to understand, along with myself, that white privilege exists, that there is a difference when an African American walks out of their house and gets in their car or walks into a store or gets on the bus or gets onto a trolley than if a white person does any of those things. I sent Jamel Hill, who's a podcaster, very famous woman, African American woman, writer for The Atlantic, a message and she wasn't alone. I sent it to a bunch of people, and she answered me surprisingly. I don't know why she answered me, but she did, and we've had some subsequent brief conversations. And initially, I was talking to her about football and the ridiculousness of the football situation and the lack of head African American coaches in the NFL. But it led me to The Atlantic to read some of her stuff, including what's going on with the WNBA. And some of the pressures that the WNBA players have put on people, including the ownership group of the Atlanta Dream. So let's transition to the WNBA. And so the WNBA, they bring in about $60 million a year, whereas the NBA brings in several billion. But, I want to talk a little bit about what happened in Georgia. And if this doesn't really tell you that there are strength in numbers, that your vote does matter. I guess it sort of started with Stacey Abrams, right? She's a politician. She was, she served in the Georgia House of Representatives, and she's been a voting rights activist for a long time. But she just sort of came into the spotlight nationally more recently because of her efforts with grassroots efforts and things like Black Votes Matter, that was started by Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright in Georgia, which mobilized local groups to, get people to not only sign up, but to get to the voting booths. And so when the WNBA was in the bubble, for those of you that don't know, and the WNBA supports Planned Parenthood, they support LGBTQ plus communities. They support Black Lives Matter. Now, they don't have the type of clout that the NBA does, but let me just give you some perspective from what I've learned. At the time the WNBA, after Kelly Loeffler, who was a senator in Georgia, made comments about how the Black Lives Matter movement is anti-Semitic and promotes violence and destruction across this country. And she continued over the course of several months to rip Black Lives Matter and saying she won't sell the stake in her WNBA minority ownership of the team and all this other stuff. And it reminds me of like people saying that the insurrection was started by Antifa. Like, this is what happens when you make dumbass comments and you think that your privilege is going to get you a Senate seat. Well, Kelly, I got freaking news for you. You're out as senator, and you're going to be out as the minority owner of the Atlanta Dream. So I hope you come correct one day. I really do, because I don't want the division that has caused this country to have so much hate and hostility for one another. And Jamel talked about this also. in her article about Kelly Loeffler and the WNBA that at the time the WNBA put on the shirts in support of the Reverend Warnock, who ended up winning the election, he was polling at 9%, not 19, not 29, not 39, 9. Now, most of you know that Georgia has been a red state for a long time before this past election. And so the women in the WNBA decided that they were not going to say Kelly Loeffler's name, that they were simply going to support Reverend Warnock, and that in and of itself was going to be a sign that they weren't going to give traction to people like Loeffler, who that's what they want you to do. They want you to think about them. They want you to talk about them. That's how they get traction. And they decided they weren't going to do that. And so that started trending. And so you can see what ended up happening because of these women of the WNBA, because of Stacey Abrams, because of Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright and all these grassroots efforts in Georgia to get people to understand that their votes mattered. So as I mentioned earlier, I sent messages to a lot of NFL people, a lot of media people, including Jamel Hill and Doug Williams and Hugh Jackson and many others. I was just so frustrated after the rumor that Josh McDaniel, which, you know, he's deserving. He's passed up head coaching positions in the past. He's a great coordinator. He's been a part of Super Bowls. But it's just remarkable that more opportunities still, even after everything this year, are not available to African American men or women for head coaching positions. And so she said, I'm actually writing a column about that very issue right now. And she later went on to tell me that she, was sending it to her editor and it was going to be out soon. There's so many African Americans that are qualified to be head coaches when the same old white guys are recycled, or guys who haven't even been coordinators, which has always been the argument, right? That, you got to go up through the ranks and you got to be this coach and then you got to be this coach and then you got to be an offensive coordinator. You got a guy like Eric Bieniemy with Kansas City, who's on his way to possibly winning his second Super Bowl and could have been on his way to winning a third, is now being marginalized because they say, well, that Andy Reid makes all the big decisions. Like, come on, man. Look at Byron Leftwich. He started off slow. It's not an easy thing to bring in a Hall of Famer, and as much as I've been critical of Tom Brady, Byron Leftwich has improved as the year has gone on. Like, if that's not a sign, don't you want to see improvement from your players, from your coaches? Don't you want to see them evolve, be flexible, have good in-game adjustments, have good game plans from week to week? Quarterbacks coach for the Chargers, Pep Hamilton, like what he did with Justin Herbert, like, man, that guy, he had a great rookie season. I'm glad for Robert Saleh getting the job with the Jets. There's a ton of guys. Like, it's ridiculous that these guys aren't getting. And I don't know who's going to get the Houston Texans job, but like, it's just crazy. It's just ridiculous. The other thing I want to talk about is Kyrie Irving. And there's a lot of people that have done some great things when it comes to activism. Maya Moore is one that comes to mind. And, for those of you that don't know, when she was really young, she started campaigning for Jonathan Irons' wrongful conviction, who was sentenced to 50 years in prison for something he didn't do. And we've gone on this podcast to talk about Julius Jones. If you don't know Julius Jones' story, look him up. There's a lot of people in prison for things they did not do. I heard Stephen A. Smith talk about how he should retire. I'm like I understand a little bit where he's coming from, but it's like, come on, man. Like, you haven't had a conversation with him. You haven't spoken to him about where he's at, just because he's had some other things go on and he's, shown some instability. Like, let's take a look at what Kyrie's done over the last year. He donated $323,000 to Feeding America. He partnered with City Harvest to ensure 250,000 meals were distributed to New Yorkers. He partnered with Nike to donate 17 pallets of food and masks to the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. He committed $1.5 million to help pay for WNBA players' salaries who opted out of the 2020 season. He paid off the college tuition of 9 HBCU students from Lincoln University. He purchased a house most recently for the family of George Floyd, according to former NBA player Steven Jackson. So, and then I heard his comments, the other day about oppressed communities and how there's so many things going on that he just, needed a break, talking about mental health and the political and social climates in America. And, I've talked about this a couple of times on the show about the accumulation effect. And I've never been a professional athlete, but I did play 4 years of college basketball. And I can tell you, after a tough practice, I'm done. Right? I was done. Those of you that have played sports, you understand. And so when you win a ring and then you go somewhere where the pressure is on you to lead the team in the biggest market, arguably, along with LA, arguably in the world, and especially in the basketball world, it's exhausting. And so I can imagine really, how he must feel, and he just needed a break. And I don't think we can begrudge him for that, and we certainly shouldn't necessarily say that he should retire without hearing his thoughts. I just thought that was way over the top and just ridiculously overboard. Instead of, supporting him, God forbid, something terrible should happen. I'm glad he's okay. And, I think he's gonna, after this break, be rejuvenated, and we'll sort of see what happens. But him and James Harden and KD, arguably, are one of the best trios that have ever played together in the NBA, you could argue, and it's going to be interesting down the stretch. And it's a long season. Nobody cares about the regular season, right? Remember, the Lakers were up and down last year, and they couldn't get it together, and they made all these switches this year, and they just got tripped up by Golden State. It takes time. It's a long season. And so people only care about the playoffs anyways, and the players, know that that's all that counts. So, good luck to Kyrie and the Nets, and to Steve Nash, who, I think could be a lot like Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr took over from Mark Jackson. Mark Jackson should be an NBA head coach somewhere. But Steve Kerr took over and built off of what Mark Jackson had started and done, and created and adjusted the culture a little bit. And I think Steve Nash, who had the approval of those guys, and James Harden's more matured now, and so I think it'll work out. And I think the Nets, and the Lakers will meet in the finals, and I think it'll be a great finals if the Lakers and the Nets meet in the NBA finals. But as far as Kyrie goes, we need to give this guy a break. I think it's just ridiculous, to beat this guy up so badly, and yeah, he's got a job to do, and yes, he should have communicated better. But at the same time, I know if I didn't have one of my players come to my practices after coaching college basketball, or currently coaching at a low-income first-generation high school, I would immediately reach out and say, hey, is everything okay? People have stuff, that people have things that happen to them. They don't always have the ability to communicate emotionally, or for a multitude of other reasons. So I would tell Stephen A. to maybe back off his comments and until he knows a little bit more about the situation to make such a serious statement about suggesting that he should retire. I just thought that was too much. Thanks again for joining us today in the Sports Deli for this special edition on Inauguration Day 2020. And until next time, please mask up. Remember, Black Lives Matter. Peace.